Hi again, everybody. I'm Jamie Ellison, and this is the Big Idea, Big Moves podcast. This is the destination for high performers. We talk to people from different genres, different fields of expertise. We've talked to CEOs, we talk to athletes, we've talked to authors, just people doing really cool things in their area of expertise that hopefully we can take some of those away and apply them to our own lives as well. I know we have one of those people today, really cool interview that we're going to get into in just a couple of minutes. Obviously, at the start of the podcast, we usually will kind of talk about a couple of things that have to do with some sponsors and stuff like that. One thing that, if you know me personally, you know I like craft beer. One of the cool things recently is that we've found Athletic Brewing. And Athletic Brewing is where they have craft beer, but it happens to be non-alcoholic. So a lot of the people who listen, it's quite appealing to them. Bill and John, who are the founders of Athletic, they started the company for the same reason a lot of us would like it. There's that craft brew kind of good taste experience. They just found there weren't anything for people who are being careful about how many calories they're bringing in, or just want to have that option for them as well. So yeah, we've made some connections with them, and we know that a lot of our audience would be interested in it. So it's called Athletic. All you have to do is you can check it out by going to our Instagram page on the bio. Just go into there and you'll see that I think they have something on there right now too, where you can get free shipping for orders of 2 or more 6-packs. So check it out and see if it's something that you'd enjoy. But we know it's something that there isn't a whole lot on the market like that. So happy to have them on board with us as well. So today, really happy to have Traci Callahan with us. She's a highly accomplished pro beach volleyball player. While she was in school, she was also awarded the NCAA Div II Freshman of the Year, Female Athlete of the Year, and was a 3-time All-American. Following college, she switched to beach volleyball and had entered the pro ranks. She's been a USA national team athlete. She's competed internationally, I know, at least in North America, Central America, Caribbean. So she's been kind of through that whole kind of circuit as well. She's also spent time coaching at Florida State University, has been a yoga instructor, and is also a successful fitness influencer. So a lot of things that are on kind of Traci's plate. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here, Jamie. Thanks for inviting me on.
No problem. And you know, we've already touched on you've done a lot of things in the last little while and really kind of varied your career a little bit. And so maybe just would you mind working us through a little bit of your kind of career journey? Because I know there was even a break in your time with beach volleyball for a little while, and maybe work us through a bit of that before we would jump into some other things.
Absolutely. I would say the consistent thread throughout my life has been the word curiosity. And I've found myself to be incredibly curious in multiple fields of life. And I remember my first year playing college volleyball at Cal State San Bernardino. I remember thinking, am I going to spend the next 4 years just doing the same movements over and over again, the same block moves? I'm like, I want to study abroad. I want to see what college has to offer. I want to get more into the arts, you know, to just be bound by playing a sport. It felt so limiting. On the other side, I was really good at my sport that I played. So I felt like I had to keep going, and I had to keep going down this path because I was so good at it. And I also really loved doing it. So I just, in one way, wished that I could do everything, even though I was limited by only having one body, you know, so I can only do one thing. Physics limits me, like it limits all of us. So actually, my first year in college, I stopped playing. I quit my first year out of college because I wanted to do other things. And my coach there, I was going to Cal State San Bernardino, it's in Southern California. And he said, you know, I just don't think you should stop playing. I think that you should go check out the school called Concordia University in Irvine. And it was closer to the beach. You know, he said the coach there, she's an Olympian. She's a great role model. It's by the beach. I just think you'll really like it. So I was like, whatever. So I went and checked it out, and I'm like, well, that this seems okay. So because
Yeah.
it seemed okay and it was by the beach, I did it. And I kept playing volleyball and fell back in love with it. And also was able to, I picked a degree in international studies, which meant that I had to study abroad as part of finishing that degree requirement. So in my mind, it was a way for me to kind of accomplish two things at once. So I was able to go study abroad. I lived in Europe, and was able to do that after I was done playing volleyball. So my senior year. And then that really had an influence on the fact that I wanted to come back to Southern California, where it was much warmer than the early months in France or Europe. And I just started playing beach volleyball in Newport Beach. And it was such a social scene that really drew me in, because it was just really fun. Like, you can imagine when you think of beach volleyball, you think of fun in the sun, friends, going to get some lunch afterwards, maybe having a drink. Like, it just and a little bit of a sunburn afterwards. I can
Yeah.
imagine all the things that people in Toronto probably would love.
Yeah. Right now. Yes, for sure.
So, yeah, so that brought me back to beach volleyball. But then it's like, when I look back on my life and playing the sport, it does go through this like cyclical process of like, I'm really good at this thing, but man, I have a lot of other interests in life. And I think that's been a really difficult thing for me to be able to maintain a focus, because I have been drawn to so many different aspects in life.
Yeah, like that's the one thing that I noticed, and I guess it does work both ways in many ways, because some of the things that you have done, like do you feel that that adds to kind of your ability, like as you gain more experience over time and all of those things, do you think would you have gained more from being more focused, or would you gain more from having varied experience like you've had?
So I think I was actually I was talking to somebody who's my age, and she's going through something similar. She's not an athlete per se,
Yeah.
but she was just talking about, she got her degree in art, and she's not doing anything in art. And I was saying sometimes it's a process of elimination, and you go through life, maybe it's even relationships, and you keep finding the relationship that you don't want to be in, right? And then one day here comes that relationship, like, oh my gosh, like I had to go through all of that, and finally like now I really appreciate you. And I find that for my life, I've done a lot of process of elimination, but I think it's all like the success I've had most recently in beach volleyball. I find that I've been able to maintain a higher level of intensity in the daily routines, as well as a more consistent focus, because I've been there, done that with the other things. I know what's behind those doors. It's almost given me the freedom to just really focus in on playing beach volleyball, knowing it's only a small amount of time. I'm not going to be doing this for the rest of my life. And to really like see, really the question that I keep trying to answer is, what would happen if you committed fully everything you could to this sport? What could that look like? And so that's the question I'm trying to answer, and I've been able to answer. And what's been really cool about that is that it hasn't so much manifested in I've won all these tournaments, and I've just been injury free. That hasn't I mean, because those things would be great, but that hasn't been my path so much. But what has happened is I find myself in these environments that I think are really special, being able to train alongside Olympic athletes right before they're going to go to the Olympics. I'm going down to Brazil in November to train with Kerry Walsh's coach this last Olympic quad for 6 weeks, because I was able to meet him and develop a relationship with him. And so I think these are all really, really unique situations that I'm happy to be, living, to be able to
Yeah.
live these situations. And the other thing is, oh, I just had something on the tip of my tongue. What was it? Oh, I'll have to move on, but I thought I had something really great, but maybe I'll come back to it.
Yeah. Well, and it is interesting when you're talking about having, you've decided, okay, I'm going to focus very heavily on one thing for a period of time. Did you find Was that difficult to do? Like, is it difficult to kind of fully invest yourself in something like that after kind of being in and out a couple of times, and then now I'm going to wholly go into that? Because that could be volleyball, but it could be a whole bunch of other things depending on if people are entrepreneurs or whatever they are.
Yeah, it was difficult because my habit, I would say, would be to kind of toggle between a couple different things. So at first it was difficult, but the way I managed that was I personified the doubt, and I almost created it as like this evil entity, right? So this evil entity would show up whenever I was dealing through an injury, and it would say, hey, are you sure you want to do this? And I'm like, oh, there you are, and it was like this mental game I played with myself of seeing that there will be that doubt and wanting to quit will show up in all different types of ways. Some ways I may not even be able to recognize at first, but as long as I can recognize it and see it for what it is, which is this evil thing that's trying to take away from what I'm trying to do, then I can recognize it and see it for what it is, which is a distraction, and then move forward. So that's been a very tangible way that I've been able to kind of eliminate and move past my cyclical habit of, just bouncing around and trying different things, to being able to be really focused on something and to really delve into the nuances of what that looks like.
And you mentioned the mental part. Obviously, that's what we're talking about there. For you, as a high level athlete, there is obviously what you do for training and all of those things just physically. But a lot of athletes now spend a lot of time on the mental side of whatever their sport is as well. First of all, do you do that? But also, what is harder for you? Like, is it harder to kind of have gains from a physical standpoint, or is it harder to kind of control the mental side of whatever the game is that you're playing at the time?
So I think the physical is pretty linear for the most part. So it's easier to define, to see, to measure progress. I think the mental part is very tough to measure. So that's where it can be harder to see the progress in that. And it can also feel like it's more difficult to develop progress because you can't see it, right? And then every person comes to the door of, hey, I want to improve my mental game from all sorts of different places. A lot of the times we're even unaware of our own motivations, our own behaviors. We have very limited self-awareness. Oftentimes we don't even notice if we're holding our breath. And we have all this conditioning from, nurture nature argument that's going into this moment of, hey, I want to learn to I want to improve my mental game. Well, we're all starting from very different places. It's almost like if you were to get a classroom together and you had a preschooler there, some guy with his PhD, a woman in her third year of undergraduate school, and you said, hey, we're all going to start at the same level. We're going to learn this. It's just not possible. But what you would do on the physical side is you would usually find people who have the same expertise, the same technical and tactical knowledge, and then you would progress and know how to progress a team like that. So I think the mental, again, is just very difficult to measure and to progress. So that obviously, based upon that, has been the hardest thing for me to measure. And I think the hardest thing, especially for high performers, is that generally I find the people that are high performers aren't very patient, very motivated, but they're not very patient, especially when it comes to getting things done. So, with the challenge of trying to improve whatever aspect of the mental game you're trying to improve, you have to remember that it's going to be 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, and just entering that into the equation. Because I think for me personally, it can be very limiting for me in my progress to want to move forward. And I think, man, I was great last week, and then all of a sudden this week, some little thing that I totally took care of 3 weeks ago and I should no longer have to deal with that, all of a sudden affected me. It's like, it's just not, it unfortunately doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Well, and so for you, are you, I mean, I'm assuming you're one of those very kind of driven people. So how do you set goals yourself, or do you? Like, are you a person who says, okay, this time I'm going to, move my results from A to B, or is it a little more general than that? Like, how do you approach goal setting?
So I set fixed goals that allow for flexibility. And I set long-term goals, and then I set more like regional, like every 3 months sort of goals, and then obviously goals for the week.
Yeah.
And even for the day. I'm getting down to like goals for the day, just so that I can again help measure my accomplishments, because I tend to forget the great things I've done, and I am only looking forward to the things I haven't accomplished yet.
Yeah.
So I think just for peace of mind. But
Yeah.
for example, during COVID, when everything was shut down, my goal was, there were no tournaments like on the calendar, and potentially there weren't any tournaments that entire year. But my goal was, I'm going to train and improve my level of volleyball, this entire year. And so since that was my goal, that's kind of how I measured the day. So I was able to find a private court I could practice at. When that wasn't available, there were parks, sometimes the parks were 100 miles away that I would drive to practice. And so that was my goal. And there happened to be a tournament that year, and I played well. So, but I didn't have any goals per se for that tournament, because I wasn't sure what to expect. But I did have goals as far as like, this is what I'm going to do. So more process, I guess, than outcome oriented goals. And then this last year, I had some goals. That my biggest goal this last year was to get more points on the FIVB World Tour. So that was what I set out to do. And the unfortunate part was, so I kept my training going, but because COVID pushed everything back, even though I had enough points, that I would have been able to get into tournaments, 2 years ago before COVID, more players with more points were now playing in the entry level tournaments. So I was pushed out, and I wasn't able to enter into the first couple of tournaments for the year. And then the first tournament I was able to enter into was in Rwanda, in Africa, of all places.
Oh, wow.
So that was, I had to travel to Africa just to get some points on the board. That was interesting.
Yeah.
And then after that, I was dealing with like a chronic injury, so I had to stop, and I wasn't able to play in some of the tournaments. So that was my goal for last year, but I really wasn't able to accomplish it just because of circumstances that happened.
Sure. Well, and it's a strange year for everybody there too, right? So I think it throws everybody's goal setting off for that year.
Yeah.
One of the things that you've mentioned, that okay, what you're doing now, you'll be doing for a period of time, and it won't be forever, because athletics, that's kind of how it works, especially when it's kind of professional level. One of the things we've talked to, different athletes where they struggle a lot with that. What do I do kind of when this phase finishes? Have you thought a lot about that? And are there things that, because you have had experiences in other areas, and so that I think is probably a positive, but have you thought about how that transition would work for you, and how some people struggle with that?
Yeah, I've thought about that for over a decade. And that's, I stopped playing volleyball and technically kind of retired around 2015, and got into playing coaching collegiately. So I thought about it then, and then realized coaching collegiately wasn't exactly the path I wanted to take. So yeah, I have thought about it a lot. Not only one of the things I did while I wasn't playing volleyball was I worked on an organic urban farm. I interned for about 5 months. And so it was like a full immersion in something I really had no experience in. So it was fantastic, and really loved, for me, being in the garden, and growing plants and harvesting them. It was really healing, and it was just an experience. I thought, wow, more people need this experience. Just because everybody is getting really sick, and heart disease is the largest killer, in at least in the United States, for men and women. And I'm like, yeah, diet and lifestyle. And that's something that as an athlete, it's very natural for me to take care of my health and to be active, because that's just what I do. It's part and parcel with my job. But I've noticed, like, even me, I'm 34, some of my friends are really struggling with this at the age of 34, and I'm like, okay, what is this going to look like in 15 more years for them, or even for me if I stop playing volleyball tomorrow,
Yeah.
so health and well-being, fitness, I really am drawn to those fields, and psychology as well. And more recently, I've started taking some undergrad psychology courses. So I've gone back to school just to kind of test and see what I like. And then I'm actually looking at schools for naturopathic medicine. So that seems to kind of check all the boxes for all of the levels of interest that I have.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean, kudos to you, because I think that is something that a lot of people struggle with, and struggle a little late because they don't do some of that pre-planning and start thinking about it, because the reality is it will come whether you want it or not. So it's just trying to figure out how best to be prepared for it. So
Yeah, and I will say, I just want to add one more thing to that too,
yeah.
because I had a friend, and this actually goes into what I was going to say before that I forgot. A friend of mine who's top lawyer in the music industry. He said to me, he's like, Traci, I've been doing my job for 40 years. He's like, if it was 30 years, there'd be no difference. It's like,
Yeah.
so at this side of things, what would it be another 10 years? But when you're on the beginning side, it feels like, oh my gosh, everybody's been in their career for 10 years. I'm starting so late, so that was like an interesting perspective of looking at from the end, from backwards, instead of like, oh, what is it like forwards? Like, no, at the end, looking backwards. And then I had a friend too. She was a teacher, and she had her master's in education. She had been teaching, I think, for almost 20 years. And at the age of 50, she decided that instead of going towards her retirement teaching, that she actually wanted to get a PhD in sports psychology. And so she started over, and she's a really good friend of mine, and she's almost done with her dissertation. And I look at her and I'm like, you know what? She did not settle on something because that was what society had told her she should do. In fact, she had to fight against that. A lot of friends who were very concerned about her decision, but she went for what she wanted to do, because at the end of the day, it's her life, and she has to deal with the consequences of her choices. So she's somebody I really look to as like, you know what, it's okay to search and try to and struggle with, even if you don't know what you want to do, or if you've knocked on a bunch of different doors. And so I feel like those two people in my life have really been instrumental in giving me the freedom to go at my own pace.
Yeah, and it's whether, are you going to struggle more with regret than you would with whatever comes
Right.
with your choice, right? So
Yes.
well, and so you actually do a lot. You have a real kind of influencer space and everything, if you want to call it that. Do you do that from a is it purely you just happen to do that, or do you use that from a business standpoint? Like, do you actually actively do a fair amount of that yourself, just to build up your profile for whatever that is, and sponsorships and all those things?
That's the only reason I do Instagram,
Yep.
to be honest
Yep.
with you. If
Yeah.
I didn't have to, I wouldn't be on it at all.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of danger that goes into social media, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, more relationships are happening on social media than in person, and I've just seen personally the negative side of that. So I wouldn't be on it if I didn't have to. However, because I'm on it, me and my husband, are very strategic about what we post, when we post, the frequency of posting, and posting for my audience. So those are things that we're very strategic about, because at the end of the day, no, if I posted stuff about just everything that I loved and cared about and thought was really awesome and neat, nobody would care. My mom would care.
Yeah, well, hey, and originally that's probably why people would have done it, but now it's become something different than that. So it
Right.
is interesting to see kind of how much of it is just it's like a business stream for some people, and that's how
Exactly.
they use it, right? So
Yeah.
that's interesting. So one of the things that we ask every person that we talk to, Traci, is to try to get a couple of things that people listening can take away, and I can say they've probably done lots of that today. You've brought some really good material today. one of the things is you are obviously in a lot of situations that are maybe high stress or just some high pressure situations, and that translates into things not just athletics but other things as well. Maybe just, do you have a couple of tactics or tricks or tips that people could kind of do to how do you clear your mind? How do you maybe kind of push that stuff out during a high pressure situation yourself?
Yeah, I think it comes down to really knowing yourself and what your tendencies are. I have a really strong tendency of having high anxiety that allows me not to breathe in games and makes it so that I have no more fine motor skills. It's really awesome.
Works well, I'm sure.
Works great for me when I go to play for high pressure moments, right? So knowing that
Yeah.
it's something that I can't just ignore it and it'll go away because it's just a part of me, then I really have to be very good about how I mentally prepare for a tournament, and what I say to myself. And I have to really have these inputs in the conversations I have with mentors or people before these tournaments. And for me, a lot of it comes down to is measuring myself against myself. So, and again, staying curious. I
Yeah.
wonder what could happen if, instead of like, I have to win this game because they're not as good as me, but this game's going to be hard because they won more tournaments. And and it's just like, just being open-minded and curious, and being in situations where it's like, don't get ahead of yourself, don't get ahead of the moment, just be in the moment, be creative, and just play your best, see what it's like to play your best in this moment. And that's really been something that's helped me get through tough moments, is just, what would it be like if I played my best in this moment? That's a question that I like to answer. And then other things, like, honestly, the different skills that I've learned through breath work have been really helpful. Exhaling, like the double exhale, that was something I learned from Dr. Huberman. He has like a podcast called the Huberman Lab that I think is
Yeah.
great. And I've heard other people talk about it too, but you take inhale and then you exhale, and then at the end exhale, you have one more exhale. And that just really helps to like slow everything down, because when you are getting into this, like, sort of, not breathing, holding your breath, or breathing too fast, time goes by really fast. You can't think as well. Even like, panic attacks can happen. I've had that in practice before, where I've had like a panic attack because of the stress. And so it's all really real. Even if it's just volleyball, like, all of these things still come up, even though it's just a game.
Yeah.
So really just learn yourself, learn to identify your own behavior, learn to check in with yourself. Those have been some really helpful tricks that I use and try to use as much as I can. But guess what? Don't always do the right thing. Sometimes I forget. Sometimes I hold
Yeah.
my breath. Sometimes I yell. Like, it's a freaking art, not a science. It's an art and a science.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the way to look at it, is that everybody struggles with that stuff, and just how much. I love the fact too that you talk about. It's really self-awareness is where you start to get to, is how aware can you be of yourself ahead of time, and then in the moment as well, and
Right.
can when you can lose it. So
Yeah,
that,
because I think it's so amazing that we've got this body that has all of these like automatic processes that happen, but then we have this conscious brain that's able to orchestrate all this stuff. And a lot of times they're at odds, and I just think, what an interesting thing that we all live with this every single day. It just fascinates me.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I mean, I will tell you, it's been fantastic talking to you. I mean, you have brought some really cool things that I know, whether there's somebody who's an athlete or somebody from a whole bunch of different areas, because we have a real varied audience. So this has been great, I know, for anyone. If people are trying to follow you, Traci, and what's happening with you, what are some of the best ways of doing that?
So my biggest, I say I post the most, do everything on social media on Instagram, which is Callahan Volleyball. And then I also have a website that tracicallahan.com. So those are two places that you can find me.
Okay, and we'll put those in the show notes so that people can make sure that they click through to that as well. If you haven't hit subscribe on the podcast, make sure you do that right now. We have great people each week, just like Traci. So again, I know you're busy, so thank you so much for taking the time today. And I know you've given our audience a lot of great value today. So I really appreciate it, Traci.
Thank you, Jamie. Appreciate it.
All right, and we will talk again to everybody else on Big Idea, Big Moves.